Miss Tuning, 'tis that time. You are my father. Wait, no, that's the wrong movie.
Yes, good evening, everybody. It's time to start the work session. We've got a couple folks here from our comprehensive planning team and community engagement, Lindsay Mosier, Andrea Tuning, and Deanna Dupuy. We're going to give you a rundown on Module 3 of the zoning code rewrite. Take it away.
Thanks, Crystal. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Lindsay Mosier. I am the communications manager for planning and development services. And thanks for the hello. Thanks. And we're just going to give a quick, I'm going to go give a quick overview of how we've got here, kind of the process moving forward. And then Andrea and Deanna will go through Module 3 with you all. So just as a quick recap, we kicked off this project back in fall of 2020, even earlier in 2019. We've broken the entire process up into modules. We've done some pretty extended community outreach through each of the modules. Last time we saw you was this summer when we did some substantial changes to modules 1 and 2. And then we are finishing up community outreach right now on Module 3, which includes process and procedures. The goal for this, of course, is for us to submit to this commission and hearing body in February with hope of adoption in summer of 2023. So just as a quick recap of kind of our goals that we heard from the community is like our guiding light as we move through Module 3 is that we know that we have a variety of great neighborhoods and want to recognize those. We want to direct development where there's planned public investment. We want to make sure we have a strategy to produce affordable and sustainable housing and, of course, manage growth along the edges of our city. And now I'm going to pass it off to Miss Andrea Tuning, who's going to go over the first part of Module 3 for you guys.
Thank you. For the record, Andrea Tuning with our Planning and Development Services staff. We are happy to be able to walk through some of the synopsis of Module 3 with you today. We've had the opportunity to kind of track along with you through Modules 1 and 2. And so today we'll go ahead and continue from there. So as we left off with you on the revised Modules 1 and 2, our community outreach really started to provide feedback for us to move forward into Module 3. And what we heard in those original outreach efforts was people were really seeking consistent and predictable decisions. That was really important to them. They also wanted for everyone to have a clear role within the process. And so really identifying who those stakeholders are and how they can participate in the process. And of course, coordinating the conversations with all of our partner agencies and partner departments. And so we really used this feedback to kick us off on what we wanted our development process to look like. And we really decided that the foundational goals were to reinforce our city's vision and goals so that we knew that we were supporting and aligning those, involving our community partners as early in the process as we could to ensure that we could meet those desired outcomes, and then, of course, resulting in excellent projects for our city. And so this is a brief synopsis of what Module 3 will propose. And so if you have an opportunity to read that draft document, it's on the website. But it ultimately creates some new application typologies. And so there are 4 specific types of applications that we have proposed. And we'll go into a little bit of detail so you understand what those are. We've also created a new application type that talks about allowed use and allowed form or allowed use and alternative form. So even though a use is always allowed in a specific zone, it's really important how that building is designed and how it's built within our city. And so we want to make sure that we are providing the most efficient way for our land to be utilized. And so through that, we've created this process, and we can walk you through that as well. We've also proposed to establish an interdepartmental review committee. So ultimately, that is a group of individuals that can meet prior to an application submittal. It allows both internal departments as well as external agencies to be able to meet around a single table and discuss an application to make sure that we are achieving all of the goals of the agencies, and one agency's goal doesn't deter another agency's goal. We also would like to reintroduce the hearings examiner. As you are very familiar with, the workload for P&Z has become quite extensive. And so the hearings examiner is one way to alleviate some of that workload. It can also create very specialized individuals and bodies that can make decisions in regard to specific application types. And we'll go through some of that as well. We'd also like to reclassify the design review committee from a committee to a commission. Ultimately, that allows us to create an efficiency in our process. And so if there are appeals, a design review commission application would then be appealed to the city council rather than coming to you and then the city council. So it creates an efficiency in that regard. And also when we talk about those expertise, we can get the right type of application before the right body. So when we're talking about design review is appropriate. When we're talking about land use decisions, planning and zoning is the appropriate location, or policy decisions, which is ultimately held by our city council. And then finally, the last is to really take a look at our required findings. And so we'll give you some examples of how we have proposed to change those to really inform our decisions and make sure that we are getting those excellent projects that we're looking for. The typologies that we have created within the new process and procedures section does identify a simple review. So that would be something that does not require a lot of detail. You either meet the goals or you do not. We can process that within just a few days. Type 2 are more administrative decisions where they might have use specific standards attached to them, and they might take up to 2 weeks for us to review those. Type 3 are your appointed body reviews, and type 4 is your city council reviews. And when we take a look at the graph, you'll see those typologies across the top. The silver band just below that gives us the appeal structure that goes along with each one of those. And then we also have some specific examples of what could fall under there. So a temporary sign that would be up for 14 days. We can approve that either over the counter or very quickly. Records of surveys, duplexes, triplexes, they do have some use specific standards. So we want to take a little bit additional time. But with those type 2 applications, because those are administrative reviews, those could be appealed to our hearings examiner. So they would be able to take some of those, that workload from you as well. And then you're going to notice that there are some asterisks below. Those say identify where we do want to make sure that we do have some additional coordination, either internally between our departments or our external partners, such as ACHD, ITD, irrigation companies, those types of facilities. We want to make sure that we can get those to an interdepartmental review committee. And so that is, we've identified and flagged some of those that should require those additional coordination efforts. Type 3 is really what will be most impactful to you. Our hearings examiner will review variance applications as well as appeals from type 2 administrative reviews. Planning and zoning, you will really focus on those use-related items, so expansions of non-conforming uses greater than the 20%. The allowed use alternative form. So if somebody decides to build something that is contrary to what we've identified as the ideal form, it would come before you. Conditional use permits, which you currently hold, and then as well as our more complex river systems and hillside permits as well. Design review will continue to hold design related items such as major design review applications, as well as major small lot, which would be 5 or more consecutive small lots in a row. And then historic preservation would obviously continue to focus on their expertise of historic preservation. All of the city council level decisions are specifically identified within the Local Land Use Planning Act, that those are to be reviewed by them. So that made that typology really easy for us to create. Comprehensive plan amendments, zoning ordinance amendments, annexations or rezones, as well as planned unit developments and subdivisions fall in that category. You bet. The new orange. So in type 4, the Local Land Use Planning Act identifies everything within that last column to be reviewed and approved by the city council. When we go back to type 3, those are items that are, you've noticed that they're in orange. That means that we as the city have determined that we would like to include our public in the public process. And so we've identified them to come before the appointed bodies. So whether it's the hearings examiner, design review, planning and zoning, or the historic preservation. Yes. That is correct.
So my question or my point was that what the question was, doesn't LUPA in fact make all appointed bodies optional? So like in really small rural counties, I don't think there is planning and zoning commissions or design review. I think everything just goes to the city council or in some cases the county. So I was just clarifying if that in fact is the case.
Commissioner Gillespie, that is correct. So LUPA does identify conditional use permits as well, have to be determined by someone.
Right.
But it does create the allowance for cities to create those appointed bodies, as you've noted.
So in some sense, under LUPA, the whole point of all type 1, type 2, and type 3 reviews, LUPA doesn't establish this typology. We just can, if we want to, really to reduce the workload on the type 4 bodies, which is, what it essentially does, or what we do in theory.
Commissioner Gillespie, yes, that is correct. It's an efficiency piece as well as a determination by a city or municipality to allow others to participate in the process. Yes. So when we do take a look at each one of those review bodies, it does identify administrative review. So those are things that a staff person could approve. Those are application types 1 and 2. Those really focus on those use specific standards, as we've noted previously. That interdepartmental agency review allows everybody that has subject matter expertise to coordinate together and align their goals. So that's going to be some of those items that were type 2 with the asterisks, as well as all 3 and 4. Our hearings examiner allows us to provide a really objective and consistent reviews for variances, as well as those administrative appeals that are going to come to them. Design review committee really focuses on that architectural design, and they'll focus on those type 3 and type 4 applications, as well as historic preservation with their emphasis on historic design. You guys will focus on your land use expertise, whereas the city council relates to those policy related items. And just to kind of give a very brief overview of the interdepartmental review, it's really a collaborative event that happens prior to an application being submitted. So we don't have an application as being submitted, and then we're in the situation where we have to scramble to get things to work. The idea is that we can work together very early on. We can get a really good, solid project that's supporting those excellent projects goals. And then before you're going to see it, we're hoping that you only have 2 or 3 conditions of approval rather than the multiple conditions of approval that you might see today. And then we also want to kind of walk through some of these other items that were in that summary list. Beginning with the allowed use and allowed forms, but I'm going to kick that over to Deanna Dupuy, and she's going to help us through that process.
Thanks, Andrea. Hello, commissioners. As Andrea said, I'm going to walk us through a couple of things that we've done in the code to really help reinforce our city's vision and goals. The first one is this new application type called an allowed use and allowed form. And I'm going to walk through an example of this because it's really the best way to describe it. But in our previous outreach, we really heard from our community that they wanted us to direct development where we have planned public investment. And so we've created this hierarchy of mixed use zones that you'll see on a screen. And we care. So in these specific areas, we care really what is going to be built there, especially because we're trying to direct the most development into these areas. So what we've done is we've created allowed uses in those areas, but we also care about the way that the buildings are going to be built. And we want to put a process incentive to get what we want built there. And as I said, I'll walk through this example. We're going to pretend we're in MX3, which is the mixed use active zone. This is primarily on State Street, Vista, or Fairview. And an apartment or multifamily is an allowed use in our new code. So that would be reviewed administratively. It would be a type 2 application. However, I'm sure as the commission may know, not all apartments are made equally. And we want to really support our highest density or most dense apartments in our MX3, our most intense development there. So we're going to review them differently. So we've set the allowed use, but we're also creating an allowed form. And what we're hoping to see is 4 or more stories on within these MX3 zones. So if a developer were to come proposing a 4-story building and it's not exceeding the parking maximum, it would be considered an allowed form, and it would be it would be reviewed as a type 2 staff level application. If we were to have a developer come to us, propose an apartment, which is an allowed use, but it's going to be 3 or fewer stories, and it may have an excess of parking, we're going to make that a public decision, because is that really helping support our citywide goals, especially as we're creating investment in transit along State Street, Vista, Fairview. So it's a way to really set the system to get our process to reinforce that desired goal. Commissioner Gillespie.
Would you say your name again?
My name? Deanna.
Hi, Deanna. So I wanted to ask this on the last slide we were discussing, but suppose the staff approves something, the way back, but you can stay on that slide. We were on the MX one. Can you go forward one? So suppose on the left side, it's a mixed use MX3 type 2 staff level with interdepartmental review. It gets approved through that process, but a neighbor decides, does a neighbor or anybody have any appellate rights, and how are appellate rights generated if there isn't a public hearing?
Yes. So we have proposed that type 2 applications would still be able to be appealed, but they would be appealed to the hearing examiner.
Right.
And they would, yes. So they would have that. The neighbor could then again appeal the decision of the hearing examiner to city council.
Who would have the right of appeal to the examiner?
It is anyone, I believe,
has to
and
be,
this is
right?
how it currently is. Anything that's administratively reviewed, there's a 10-day appeal period, and anyone could appeal an administrative decision.
And what happens if they don't agree with the administrative decision?
They would appeal it to the hearing examiner.
And what happens if they don't agree with the hearing examiner?
They would appeal it to city council. Judicial review
So it would go to the courts at that point,
after the hearing examiner.
not to me and not to the city council. Yeah. Is the hearing examiner's hearing public? So there's a record created at a public record at the hearing examiner phase?
Yes. A hearing examiner meeting is a public meeting with testimony.
With just so like this, right? Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Dean, I got a question. So this slide, what kicked it from type 2 to type 3 was because we want density, we want 4+ stories. And since the application on the right is 3 or less, that kicks
Correct.
it up to a type 3. Is there another example of where something like this happens?
Commissioner Mooney, I don't have more examples in slides, but it would be if you're looking at these mixed use zones, the form is what we're trying to control. So it's actually very simple rules that either kick it to type 2 or kick it to type 3. With the exception of MX1, so MX3, 4, and 5, they're all 4 or more stories. It's occupying an existing building. And then we also have an incentive if it's affordable housing, it's all type 2. And if it's not that, it becomes type 3 for these specific uses. The MX1 is less intense because, again, that's the neighborhood development. So we don't necessarily need to see 4 stories there. I don't even think the code would allow 4 stories or it would be tight. So it has a different set of rules.
Deanna.
Mhm.
So I'm looking at that map with all that really dark gray. So what is the dark gray area?
Those are mostly residential zones. So we're only controlling or creating this application type for the zones, the reds and oranges that are showed on the map. So everywhere else, it's going to operate exactly or similar to how it operates now, where if it's an allowed use, you continue that way, or it's a conditional use and you would go type 3. I would say one thing that is important to note here, all of these application types still are going to run their own design review process. So typically a large apartment complex is going to require major design review. So there'll still be a public hearing associated with that. It would not be about the use that we're debating. All right.
Deanna.
Yes.
So we're creating 4 new zones. And is the city going to, through some city council legislative act, go through and rezone all these parcels in one swell foop according to this rubric? Or how are you going to do that? How does that work?
Yeah. So we're actually creating many new zones. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head. And we have a conversion map and it's on the city's website. So we've created specific rules about how if you were C2 previously, you would convert to this or this or that.
Right.
And so we
Right.
have that in the draft code, that legend, as well as we have an online interactive map.
But I'm just curious, procedurally, legally, how do you affect the rezone? Has to happen at the city council by a vote of the council on every parcel or referencing every parcel. Right? So there's like 10,000 parcels or 1,000 parcels that are getting some rejigger. Is that right?
There will be a conversion of all of the
Yeah, there's a
parcels.
lot
I
of
don't
them,
know
though.
the exact
There's
legal
a lot
process.
of these little buggers, right?
Yeah.
So how the heck, I'm just curious. I mean, I'm not going to hear them. So
Yeah.
I guess, but like, how's that going to work, James? How
Yeah,
are you
I think
gonna
maybe
do
this is a
that?
question for James.
How are you gonna do that? Because the city council has to go one by one by one by one, right?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, the logistics of that, certainly there needs to be, there'll need to be a plan as far as how all the zoning maps will be updated and by what means, through recorder's office or otherwise. But I think you hit the nail on the head that it's a legislative action by council to adopt amended zoning ordinance. And so it's rezoning parcels. That's true, but by redefining the zoning district that they're in. So it would be no different from other code amendments that affect zones broadly across the city. So of course, logistics to be better defined as we get closer.
Good questions. So I'll quickly go through the next slide. So this is a subtle change we're making, but an important one we think to help us really achieve that goals. We're updating our development application findings. So what you see on the left, or my left, is a previous example, and this is from the findings for design review, but we're, in a passive way saying the traffic is minimized. However, what we want to use our new code is to actually get what we want, which is a site that provides safe, convenient, and efficient transportation network. So again, very subtle, but we've gone through all the findings trying to flip that language.
Deanna, sorry, I'm just chewing on you because what the hell. So one of the biggest problems in the findings for us, for everybody, is that the adverse impact finding. And I think that's for conditional use permits. That was the big one on the homeless shelter, because, one man's adverse impact is another lady's, nice people walking through my neighborhood. So You just have, so did we change that adverse impact finding, which is the key part of this conditional use permit finding?
Commissioner Gillespie, I believe we did. And so I would actually really suggest you take a look at that and let us know if we think that's going to be an effective way how we rephrase to that. It's still draft. All right, so I'll go through our processes. So kind of comparing current process to future process. The first up here is a staff level decision. And you may have heard this, but a planner may get an application submitted and it could be anywhere in terms of quality. But once it's submitted to planning staff, we have to quickly process it and create a staff report. So what we're doing here is proposing is very similar, but again, starting with a concept review meeting so that a planner can work with that applicant before they submit the application to ensure some quality control when that application is submitted, staff report, and then a decision is rendered in our current code. And this is how it would work for a type 1 or a type 2 that does not require interdepartmental review. Or what we'll learn is, if you're a type 2 application, but you do require interdepartmental review, that applicant would find out at that concept review committee. So they go, I have an allowed use of multifamily. I want to submit my application. We go, well, multifamily typically requires interdepartmental review. So we'll get you scheduled through that process. It really helps us to, again, have that quality control and address issues like solid waste or transportation issues before the application is submitted and before a significant amount of investment and plans have been created.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So with the proposed process, what are kind of, I guess, lead times for these meetings anticipated to be? I could see potential for some of these mid-process review requirements to be just to slow timeframes and extend project schedules.
Yeah. So with the interdepartmental review, we've been talking with other departments and agencies, and we think that would be a regular meeting. So whether it's how we do our pre-apps, which are every Thursday, whether it's once a week or once a month, there would be a scheduled meeting with an agenda. They'll take a bit longer to, it's not just going to be a 30-minute pre-app because it's going to be a lot of more folks around the table. So that will be a longer meeting. So people will have to book out for that. With these concept reviews, we're really thinking of them as touchstones with a planner. So it could be a phone call, it could be something easily scheduled, but again, kind of creating gates to say, okay, you're ready to move on to the next stage. And we're working through a lot of that process now. It won't live within the code, but it will become, policy and how the staff actually are organized around that.
Gotcha.
So here is an example of our hearing level applications. Again, right now, an applicant may come with an idea between 0 to 100% complete. They'll have a neighborhood meeting. And we've heard this a lot where some neighbors will say, we had a neighborhood meeting and it was already baked, or it was so vague, we had no idea what they were proposing. They would then submit the application and we would go through partner review and that staff review, and then it would finally go to Planning and Zoning Commission. We saw that really what we want to do is address some of those issues up front. So again, having that concept review meeting with staff, if it's around 25% complete, then there would be a consistent level of detail when you have the neighborhood meeting. And we're still kind of working on what percentage is right. So we're interested in having feedback from the commission and the development community on what would work. Then we would have that mid-process review with staff. So after the neighborhood meeting, you would come back to staff. You would get scheduled for your interdepartmental review, have that review meeting, and then that application is submitted. So hopefully we've heard neighborhood feedback and agency feedback before anything is actually submitted as an application, and that timeline starts for the hearing. Again, then it would go to Planning and Zoning Commission and could be appealed to City Council. And then the last is our type 4 applications, which would be City Council review, very similar to the planning and zoning process. Again, trying to standardize those meeting steps, goes to Planning and Zoning and then City Council. And then our last goal with the zoning code rewrite is really to involve those community partners early on, which you see on.
Sorry, can we just ask a quick question?
Mhm.
Commissioner Moore.
So if you back up one more, so for these kind of incremental meetings, the difference in a design between 25% concept and 50 or even 100% concept can be relatively significant. If we're having a neighborhood meeting at 25% concept design, in a lot of cases, there's not actually a lot of detail. Sometimes it's even just some blocks and SketchUp or something like that.
Mhm.
It's interesting because that's what I was thinking is like, I think what we hear most often is that the project changed so much from the neighborhood meeting. I can imagine that finding that percentage is really tricky.
Right. And then, so I guess the question is, how do we define the city size, what 25% concept is? I mean, does it have windows? Is it just massing? Is it just kind of an idea of unit counts?
Mhm.
And then how do we rectify what the neighbors are seeing to what they see when the application is submitted?
Great comments, Commissioner Moore. And that's actually some of the feedback we've heard. Maybe, maybe the neighborhood meeting's too early. Maybe it's the interdepartmental review is first because that could significantly change the site, and then it's the neighborhood meeting and then application submittal. We're still kind of working through some of that. And we were just discussing that, I think, this morning about is there a possibility to flip some things? We've heard both the same thing from the neighborhood where it's they don't want it to be already baked, but they don't want it to be too vague that it changes so much when it's submitted. So we're still working through that. Another thing that will go parallel to the adoption of the code will be us creating, the checklists and the things we need for this new process. So we could actually define what does, 25% look like or 50% look like in terms of site plan for the application. And so that it's clear and consistent over time.
That makes sense.
So our goal to involve our community and partners early. If you haven't had a chance to see this, we've created a community development tracker, which we've always had this data, but it's been kind of wonky through Acela. So what we've done is actually now funnel all of our submitted applications to this interactive map. And so it's really useful for any resident to be able to kind of click on there and see what's in the queue and at what stage. So we're hoping that this will be a great tool as more things maybe are administratively reviewed, but that you could always check where administratively reviewed projects are within that process. There's also an opportunity right within the website to click on a specific project and it says submit comment, and it'll go straight to our planning staff so that your comment is on the record and you don't have to take any more steps on that. Again, we have that earlier neighborhood meeting, still trying to work on what is the right percentage along that process. And then we're working with creating some sort of neighborhood meeting summary, again, to create some consistency and feedback loop back to the city after a neighborhood meeting.
Deanna.
Mhm.
Two things. One, be really careful and think through that neighborhood summary because then you get problems of the record of a meeting. And we went down that trail 3 or 4 years ago. There was a little subcommittee. It came up because of prominence. There was a big ruckus, and we looked at like David Klinger wanted to essentially make the public meeting a meeting of record with notes and minutes. And everyone thought that was, or a lot of people thought that was great. That's point one. Point two, what is your thinking on signage on sites? Because that was a big issue too back then was complaints about, this little tiny 8.5 by 11 yellow sign blew away or got fallen down. And then we were putting up these giant billboards, and I don't know where we are on that. So are you going to change any of that? Or so we're going to still have the same notification
Yeah.
and
So
signage requirements?
Yeah, sorry, Commissioner Gillespie. Yeah, we know that there was that larger process around noticing several years ago, and we've decided because of that process to maintain noticing as is. And thank you for the feedback on the neighborhood meeting. We've heard a couple different, what is, how to do this, and we're still working with that.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Blanchard.
I want to take the opposite tack here because I know we're still at the macro level with all of this stuff, but it seems to me where we are at this point is we're realigning incentives so that, mostly when the neighbors come up before us, it's like they want to argue stuff that's by right. And so we'll have 300 people here saying the same thing. there's not enough parking. It's going to be safety problems. There's too much traffic and I don't have enough privacy. It's like, and we hear that over and over and over again. And that's like, we shouldn't have to bear 300 people coming here saying that stuff like that. Stuff should be worked out in the beginning so that they understand, look, these things are by right. We can't, but they're incented to come here and argue with us to try to get what they want. And on the developer side of things as well, how many times we've had to sit through applications where developers they'll ask for a variance so they don't have to put 3 more parking spots on, and they'll come here and, and boo-hoo about, oh, it's this massive redesign. And then we're like, well, take a week and redesign it. And lo and behold, they had it all designed already. Right. And it's like, and then we wasted a whole public hearing with the developer who's incented to try to get us to get the variance. So they don't have to do this little tiny thing that they already know they can do. That and projects that come in here where the developer does not agree with our findings. And it's something like the pathway that we just had a month ago, where it's like, well, we don't want to put that pathway along State Street. It's like, okay, well, they're incented to come and roll the dice with us, where they need to not be incented to come roll the dice with us. And staff and the neighborhood and the other agencies need to be firm. It's like, you're wasting your time. It's like, just make this easier on yourselves and settle it with us now. We're not going to put this before the level 3 or level 4 body. We're just not going to do it. So it looks to me like we're starting to get the incentives in the right place, even if we don't know at what percentage the meeting should be at, when the neighborhood meeting should be. But it looks like the incentives are much better to get projects baked out earlier than coming before one of the appointed bodies and just rolling the dice, which just frustrates everybody and wastes a lot of time.
Thank you, Commissioner Blanchard. Yes, I think one of our goals was clear roles and understanding of what you have influence over and what you don't.
But I would also like to say that I nominate Milt for hearings examiner, and I want him to be able to sit right there in that center
I
chair,
nominate
all by
Chris
himself. Up
Stanley.
on
Okay. We only have
Chris
like
isn't
5 minutes
here,
until we
and so
start our meeting. So let's get through the presentation as best we can.
Yeah, and this is our last slide. Just to let you know, we have 2 more public meetings for this round of outreach, and we're accepting comments on the consolidated draft till December 15th. So we would appreciate any comments, and you could send that to the email zoningrewrite@cityofboise.org, or you could send them to Crystal or any of us staff here.
Thank you so much. Really great information. We have maybe time for like one more commissioner question. Do we have any questions or did we get them all out? Perfect. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the update.
Yes, thank you, everybody. That was a great overview of Module 3, and they left us just enough time for agenda review. So luckily, this one isn't the horrendously long agendas we've been seeing lately, just a couple. So to start off, item 1 is PUD 2247 and CVA 2226. It's a conditional use permit for planned residential development of 201 multifamily units and a height exception on 2.08 acres and a variance to encroach the side yard setback. That was on last week's and had to be deferred due to lateness of hour, and the applicants couldn't make this one. So they're requesting deferral to December 5th today.
I need no minutes today.
Nope, no
Okay,
minutes.
thank you.
The next one is PUD 2261. This one was deferred from last meeting, not due to lateness of hour, but to some kind of last minute things to work out. It is a conditional use permit for planned residential development comprised of 18 multifamily units on 0.54 acres in a C2D zone. We are recommending approval, and we can try for consent on this if you all so choose. Item 3 is CAR 2219 for BDE Architecture at 916 West Sherwood Street. It's a rezone of approximately 0.64 acres from C2D General Commercial with Design Review to RODDA Residential Office with Design Review and Development Agreement. We are recommending approval, but we did get some neighborhood opposition, so we will be hearing that. And I will be your guest star, David, this evening, as he is out sick. So go easy on me. Item 4, also deferred from last week, is PUD 2243 for Glancy Rockwell and Associates at 7670 West Emerald Street. It's a conditional use permit for a planned unit development comprised of 48 multifamily units on 1.74 acres in an LOD zone. We are recommending approval, but we did receive some opposition from the neighborhood, and the applicant is in opposition to condition number 2, which I believe is in relation to cross access. We do have 2 people signed up for that, so we'll definitely be hearing it. And then last but certainly not least, the grand finale is CAR 2244 for Micron Technologies at 8000 South Federal Way. It's an, and then there's a couple of them. So that's the annexation of approximately 358.2 acres with a T2D DA, say that 5 times fast, zone. We've also got CAR 2245 for a rezone of approximately 32.1 acres from T1D to T2D DA. And then a CUP for a height exception for future microchip fabrication building and 2 gas separation columns within the associated gas plant. So those 3 will be heard. We are recommending approval and we don't anticipate anybody. And that is it. Any questions? Great.
Well, thank you,
Yeah.
Crystal.
4 minutes. All right, good evening once again, and welcome to the Boise City Planning and Zoning Commission public hearing. A few things to start out with for tonight's proceedings. Everyone from the public entering the hearing virtually has been automatically muted and cannot speak. As the item you're interested in comes up for discussion, you'll be called upon and unmuted. There is a chat function in Zoom. This is not part of the record and should only be used if technical difficulties arise. Our procedures for public hearings begin with a presentation from the planning team. Then we'll go to the applicant and then the representative of the Registered Neighborhood Association, followed by questions from the commission. After that, we proceed to public testimony, starting with those who are in person, then who signed up on the sign-up sheet in advance, and then anyone else who raises their hand virtually. If you're attending through your telephone, you can type in *9 to raise your hand. Each member of the public is allowed up to 3 minutes for testimony. We are strict with this time as it is limited in code. And finally, the applicant is allowed 5 minutes for rebuttal, after which the hearing will be closed and the commission will deliberate and render a decision. Madam Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Rain. We are citizen volunteers appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. We make final decisions on conditional use permits, variances and appeals, and recommendations to the city council on subdivisions, rezones, annexations, and code or comprehensive plan amendments. Any decision made tonight may be appealed to the city council, provided that the appeal is filed within 10 days of this hearing. In order to file an appeal, you must have given written or oral testimony at tonight's hearing. That's why it's important you give your name and address when you testify tonight. We utilize a consent agenda. This means that if the applicant agrees with the staff report and if there's no public opposition, the item will be placed on the consent agenda. All items placed on the consent agenda are approved with one motion without further public comment. For items not on the consent agenda, we will hold a full public hearing in the order just detailed a few moments ago with staff, applicant, neighborhood association, and then the public testimony. Thank you all for attending tonight, and will the clerk please call the roll?
Stead,
Here.
Schaefer, Squires, Blanchard,
Here.
Moore. Here. Gillespie,
Here.
Finfrock,
Here.
Danley, Uni,
Here.
6 present, 3 absent.
Okay, let's see. First, we will let's look at the consent agenda. It looks like we have one item for consideration of consent. This is item number 2, PUD 22-61 for Chrysalis Architecture, deferred from November 7th, 2022. This is at 5033 West State Street, a conditional use permit for a planned residential development. Is the applicant present? And are you in agreement with the terms and do you agree with the terms and conditions of the staff report? Okay, great. Let the record show that they do. Is there anybody present tonight that would like to testify in opposition of this item tonight, item number 2? Okay, seeing none in person or online, we'll place item 2 on the consent agenda. And I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Finfrock. Sorry.
I move to approve item PUD 22-61 on the consent agenda.
Second.
Great, we have a second from Commissioner Moore. If there is no discussion, will the clerk please call the vote?
Stead,
Aye.
Blanchard,
Aye.
Moore,
Aye.
Gillespie,
Aye.
Pinbrook,
Aye.
Mooney,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
Okay, we also have item number 1 is requesting a deferral to December 5th, 2022. This is PUD 22-47 and CVA 22-26 for GGLO at 6160 West Denton Street. This is a conditional use permit for a planned residential development comprised of 201 multifamily units and a height exception. Is there anybody present who was hoping to testify in this item tonight who would not be able to return for the December 5th hearing? Please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none in person or online, I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Finfrock.
I move to defer PUD 22-47 and CVA 22-26 to the December 5th, 2022 hearing.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Moore. Will the clerk please call the vote?
Stead,
Aye.
Blanchard,
Aye.
Moore.
Aye.
Gillespie,
Aye.
Pinbrook.
Aye.
Mooney,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
Okay,
Madam Chair, can you repeat who was the first and the second motioners? please?
Finfrock was the first and then Moore was second. Okay, moving along, we'll move to item number 3. This is CAR 22-19 for BDE Architecture, deferred originally from November 7th, 2022 at 916 West Sherwood Street. This is a rezone of approximately 0.64 acres from C2D to RODDA. We'll hear from staff first. Please go ahead, Ms. Spain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The item before you is a rezone of approximately 0.4 acres from C2D General Commercial with Design Review to RODDA Residential Office with Design Review and Development Agreement located at 916 West Sherman Street. As you can see here from the aerial photo, the subject property is located within the Lusk District, which is comprised of a mix of residential and commercial uses located on the west side of Capitol Boulevard near downtown Boise and the BSU campus. The requested ROD zone is compatible with the surrounding area due to its close proximity to downtown, BSU, and transit. As such, a higher density development than what is currently allowed with the C2 zone, 43.5 units per acre, is supported by Blueprint Boise, which encourages compact pedestrian-friendly infill while still maintaining compatibility in the area. The proposed RO allows for a maximum of 87.1 units per acre, which would allow for the type of dense residential development envisioned by Blueprint Boise. The RO is intended for residential and office uses and supports mixed-use projects, which includes a limited amount of commercial, including restaurants, retail, and personal services. The requested zone is compatible with the comprehensive plan as it designates the site as mixed use on the land use map, within which the proposed zone of RO is allowed and anticipated. The rezone is proposed in order to construct a 6-story building containing 34 dwelling units comprised of a mix of apartment types with 1,200 square feet of commercial on the ground floor. To ensure that the active uses along the street frontage and the design standards of the Lusk Street Master Plan have been met, a development agreement has been included. The planning team recommends the DA include the following conditions stated here to ensure that the city and neighborhood goals have been addressed. The neighborhood association and several members of the public have expressed concerns with the project in terms of compatibility and compliance with the Lusk Street Master Plan. The compatibility concerns are in response to the size and mass of the building, which they state are not consistent with the character of Lusk Street neighborhood and Capitol Boulevard. The planning team believes that the comprehensive plan anticipates high density and more intense uses in this area, given the site's proximity to downtown, BSU, and transit. The other concern is the project does not provide enough storefront commercial and that it is another student project or student housing project. To address this, I would note that the DA requires a minimum of 40% of the street frontage be comprised of active uses, where the applicant proposes 55% active use. Also, the project is comprised of a mix of apartment types ranging in size from studios to 5 bedrooms and is not intended to be solely student housing. In conclusion, the planning team recommends approval of the rezone and DA with the recommended conditions of approval. Thank you, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Rain. Next, we'll hear from the applicant. We'll start with up to 10 minutes, Ms. Nelson.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I'll wait for my presentation. Okay, great. Great. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission. My name is Deborah Nelson. My address is 601 West Bannock Street. I'm with Givens Pursley, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant, CA Ventures. With me here this evening are members of our project development team. CA Ventures will own and operate this project, and they have extensive experience in developing high-quality projects across the country with modern amenities. A few examples are shown on the slide, and they are currently the developer of 917 Lusk site north of this site. BDE Architects is the architect for the project. They're represented here this evening as well. They have 25 years of experience developing multifamily housing across the country. And the Land Group is the site designer providing civil and landscape engineering, and Jason is here tonight. All of them are available to answer your questions. We really appreciate staff's work on this. We agree with all of the conditions of approval in the staff report. As Crystal explained, we're seeking a rezone to RO to allow the development of mixed-use building with 34 residential units, multifamily units above ground floor commercial and amenity space with alley accessed podium parking. As you can see from the vicinity map, the surrounding area contains other multifamily housing, and commercial is a few blocks from South Capitol Boulevard, a major transit corridor, and it's a short walk or bike to Boise State and Morrison Park, the Greenbelt, and downtown Boise. This area is identified in Blueprint Boise as one where significant new development and redevelopment is anticipated. On the future land use map, this site is designated as mixed use, where the RO zone is an appropriate zone and housing and commercial are appropriate land uses. The project site is adjacent to RO zoning to the west. RO zoning is also near the site in the north and the southeast. The site has access to 2 transit stops on Valley Regional Transit's Route 3, which provides convenient access to the downtown VRT hub and the Boise Airport. Currently on this site is an auto mechanics business and gravel parking lot. There are no street drainage or sidewalk improvements in place at this time. This is an underutilized parcel in a redeveloping neighborhood with access to transit that is poised for increased housing density and walkable commercial uses. The proposed site plan includes on the ground floor 1,200 square feet of retail, a bike amenity space, a lobby with seating, business center, coffee area, package room at the corner of La Pointe and Sherwood Avenue with alley-loaded structured parking and enclosed bike storage. The total street frontage activation on this project is 55%, well over the 30% that was approved earlier this year at 917 Lusk. The street frontages align with the Lusk Street Master Plan, which calls for storefront Main Street frontages with a mix of retail, studio, and upper floor housing on La Pointe Street. This project will provide vertical curb gutter and a 12-foot wide landscape and furnishing zone with tree-graded trees along La Pointe and Sherwood Streets in alignment with a designated streetscape typology in the Lusk Street Master Plan. The frontage improvements include an elevated patio with seating to serve the neighborhood with a public gathering space and provide outdoor seating for the retail use, and generally activate the building frontage along La Pointe and Sherwood Streets. As you can see, this design matches the street frontage improvements across La Pointe. The project will add 9 on-street public parking spaces, plus 3 parking spaces are added along the alley inside the project property boundary that will serve the retail use. Residential parking is in the garage, hidden from view, and accommodated in this small space with modern automated stackers. On the upper floors, the project includes 34 multifamily units. This slide shows the floor plan of the second floor, which includes an indoor club room, highlighted in green there, that opens up onto a large exterior courtyard with a lounge area, grilling area, fire pit, and spa. This courtyard further activates the building's La Pointe Street frontage. The Lusk Street Neighborhood Association testified last week at another project along Capitol in this same neighborhood about concerns with adding more student housing.
Like that capital project and CA Ventures 917 Lusk project, the 34 apartments here will include a mix of studio, 1-bedroom and 2 bedrooms, as well as 4 and 5-bedroom units. The larger formats traditionally are sought out by students and remain the most in-demand housing in the neighborhood and in all areas around BSU. In fact, BSU students remain underserved from on-site and off-site housing options on the campus. Between on-site campus and off-site purpose-built student housing, only 17% of current enrolled students have an opportunity for housing in the immediate neighborhood, a concern that has been in the news recently. CA Ventures did meet with BSU about this project, and BSU was supportive. But despite that need and demand, this project is not designed only for student housing. CA Ventures will rent by the unit, not only by the room, and the project will include that mix of smaller format and larger format units to appeal to a variety of tenants. Even more important than the housing unit mix, this project is also unique from the housing that developed early in the Lusk neighborhood because it includes ground floor retail and that enhanced streetscape presence with storefront activation consistent with the Lusk master plan. CA Ventures 917 Lusk project was the first housing development in the neighborhood to include ground floor retail. And Dave Wally's new project recently approved has added that as well. On a per acre basis, this project is providing twice the commercial square footage compared to the approved 917 Lusk project. In this conceptual elevation of the building, you can see that base body separation and architectural features and materials that enhance that streetscape experience. And based on our neighbors' input, the exterior of the building will feature a modern industrial look fitting for the neighborhood. They liked the metal siding panel, the brick base, the storefront railings, and the perforated metal accents. This aligns well with the master plan's desire for urban design architectural elements. The project aligns with a number of Blueprint Boise's specific goals, including to encourage vertical mixed use, and to design activity centers to support existing and planned transit, to promote compact, walkable development patterns that support transit, to encourage high-density residential development, to develop more urban housing and livability, and to activate streetscapes and encourage urban building forms. This project has also been designed to closely align with the Lusk Street Master Plan. It fulfills a number of the general goals in the plan from the land use section by developing a walkable urban neighborhood, minimizing surface parking, mixing complementary uses, and weaving the urban fabric together with pedestrian connectivity. The land use portion of the plan speaks specifically about this block as intended to function as a just off Main Street retail district with allowance for unique retail and studio uses, as well as upper story housing. This project delivers that ground floor retail and active amenity spaces with outdoor pedestrian friendly streetscape improvements, as well as the upper floor housing that precisely as intended. The project is aligned with the urban form and design section of the plan as well. Sections of that are highlighted here. It calls for the current residential density, west side sidewalk improvements, and commercial uses to create an engaging streetscape and for new development to continue to enhance that. CA Ventures is adding to that engaging frontage with people-oriented uses, including that retail activation, elevated public patio, and amenity space. As called for in the plan, the development is on a traditional lot size rather than a super block, creating that more intimate community environment. The building also features rooftop decks and gardens as functional open space, which is aligned with the urban form and design element in the plan. The project aligns with transportation portions of the plan by preserving on-street parking, creating new on-street parking spaces, providing pedestrian-friendly walkability spaces. The plan will create that activated streetscape that aligns with street typology 3 outlined in the plan for this street with exactly the dimensions that are laid out for that streetscape with 36-foot wide streets, that 12-foot wide landscape and furnishing zone with tree wells. The project also closely aligns with the parking section by, again, creating the on-street parallel parking, the 3 alley spaces, concealing resident parking in the interior, and by generally placing housing density adjacent to transit in a walkable and bikeable area. And maybe most importantly, by converting what was a surface parking lot adjacent to an underutilized parcel and use in a mixed-use urban building form that will promote vitality in this neighborhood. So in sum, the project proposes to redevelop an underutilized site in an area that calls for redevelopment and in support of the plan and the zone. And the zone is consistent with the plan and your master street plan. And we ask for your approval and stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Before questions, we'll check to see if we have a representative from the Lusk Neighborhood Association, the Lusk District Neighborhood Association. Come on up. Please start with your name and address and you'll have 10 minutes.
So my name is Nate Heinzman. I'm 2582 North 27th Street, 83702. I am the Vice President of the Lusk District Neighborhood Association. And our neighborhood association's stance is that this development is student housing on this one, and that does come from the developer's intention to rent out by the bedroom of all the units that are 2 bedrooms and above. They did, right before these presentations, they did kind of change the weighted measurement of how each one of those are put in. They added more 1-bedroom and studio apartments in there so they can maintain that student housing model on that and still claim this as multifamily housing. Now, if we truly thought this was multifamily housing, we would be in support of it. However, the Lusk District is facing the brunt of all the student housing for Boise State. As you can see here, we currently have 74% of all housing units is student housing in the Lusk District. Now, that is in opposition of these current codes that are in the comprehensive plan and in the Lusk District master plan as well. That there is no mix of uses in the Lusk District at all. It's just student housing in there. And there's a lack of housing choices for people other than students in there as well, based on this housing model of renting it out by the bedroom on that. Now, this is a pie chart that you get because I'm a volunteer with zero budget. This is what you got. But this kind of just shows what we have for student co-housing in the Lusk District neighborhood. Obviously, there is some buildings that are for Boise State. There is some affordable housing units in the Lusk District, but I included those in the other areas as well with the hotel and office retail. But this just shows how much student housing is in the Lusk District. Now, this is our zoning code map from the Lusk District Master Plan on it. And this is located in the bottom left corner of the Yellow District, which is the pedestrian-oriented Main Street area. And this is an area that we want to preserve. This is the only area that we kind of have left that is kind of the beating heart of our kind of activation zone for the Lusk District Neighborhood Association, or just the neighborhood in general. And this is where we have Madre, Lost Grove, and Boise Bicycle Project, Downtown Hound, Dawson Taylor, the Shed, and we also have Trademark Sign and Design in that area as well. And we're hoping to keep this Yellow District zoned as it is so that we can have some more of those uses in this area. Now, there will be a small portion of this proposed development that will be activated. There is no real activation along Sherwood as stated in the presentation, because there isn't any retail or office space in that on that side. And on the LaPointe side of it, there was really only about 40% of that was the retail area as elevated. And I also don't see how second floor courtyard does street activation. As stated in the presentation as well, because that doesn't bring anybody into the neighborhood to kind of enjoy the economy of the Lusk District. But we just feel that the student housing can be best shared around other neighborhoods around Boise State campus as well, because we are overloaded. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Heisman. Okay, let's see. So next we'll go to questions from the commission. Commissioner Gillespie.
I
you
have
got
a
your finger on
question
the
for
trigger.
Nate. Nate,
Come back up to the
you focused a lot of your comments on student housing. We're what, 500, 600, 700 feet from Boise State?
Yeah, the proximity is very close.
Really close. 24,000 kids go there. What's actually wrong with student housing? I mean, what is it? What adverse, does it cause an adverse impact? Does it, what's bad about it other than it's just student housing?
Right. And a lot of the students don't really participate in a lot of the businesses that we have in the area on that as well. And you'll notice that during the summer times, it's basically desolate. And then also if you're there in the neighborhood during class transition areas, the entire neighborhood basically turns into a pedestrian area. Kids are walking in the streets and walking amongst the cars. There's very little sidewalks in the area for protection on that as well, because that doesn't change any of the other areas with the sidewalks where all the students walk on that. They do have to walk to the other areas of the Less District to get to that new pedestrian crossing across 9th and Capitol, or to get to the Greenbelt. And so they have to walk through those other areas without sidewalks to safely get to the campus on that, because you can't get it on the north side of the intersection of University and Capitol. You can only cross on the south side of that area. And then, yeah, I think just participation in the neighborhood as well.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Finfrock.
Sorry, Nate, I have a question for you. Sorry, before you walk away. I was looking over the Lusk Street area master plan, and I know it defines student housing in that it says student housing will continue to play a role in the Lusk Street neighborhood, but it should not be the sole form of housing. And right now you're saying it's 74%. Do you know once this development goes in, what the percentage will be? And I'm sorry. And also what, I mean, when it says sole, that's a pretty broad word. Do you think, what would you like to see there? And I mean, I'm wondering why the master plan didn't maybe focus a little bit on what your expectation was for student housing.
Right. So with what this development comes up to, it would be 77%. And that includes the capital project that was approved last week, and also includes 917 South Lusk Street that is being developed right now. So currently right now we are sitting at 74%. And then with those permitted projects would be 77% capacity of that right now. As far as the intention of it and why it doesn't mention that in the Lusk Street Master Plan, that was developed in 2013 and adopted by the city in 2013. Even though we do have the same problems then as we do now, I think there could be continuous development of the Lusk Street Master Plan to further put more intent onto what we would like to see there. And we would like to see multifamily housing there and much more activation around the site on there, but this proposal fails to do that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Mooney.
I got a question for the applicant. Deborah, I think I asked the same question last week, but given the discussion about student housing, the small format versus large format units on this project, last week, I think you said it was 60% large versus small format. What's the mix on this one?
Let me find that for you real quick. Madam Chair, Commissioner Mooney, yes, I remember that question. And last week, the mix was slightly different. Here on this project, it's 42% small and 58% large because it's a smaller site. But between those three buildings, so last week's project on Capitol had two separate buildings, had a much higher percentage of the small format. Between these three that City of Ventures is bringing in to the market at the same time, the total mix is 56% small format, 44% large format. And one more point of comparison, the 917 Lusk building was close to 50% as well. And that's about the target that the council has laid out in recent student council or student housing related and mixed housing approvals like over on Boise Ave as well. And so that's what they've targeted overall, is that overall 50%.
Great, thank you. Got a follow on, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Mooney, please.
Regarding the street activation and retail, could you kind of walk us through that again? What's on LaPointe and what's on Sherwood? And I guess it's more of a rebuttal opportunity now, but I just trying to understand what's true between what you and Nate said.
Absolutely. Maybe I think Crystal's going to try to pull up my presentation so we can see a visual again. Thank you. I think between these two slides, you can see a lot of it. So maybe this is where you can see the percentages of the street front activation. And so you can see the actual linear frontage of along each of those streets and the amount of activated frontage improvements there with the storefront windows and the visual in out and plus the pedestrian activity. And that includes on LaPointe, the bike amenity space, the retail space of 1,200 square feet, which is actually pretty deep. And then the lobby and amenity space that wraps the corner. And then the improvements, the outdoor improvements really stretch the entire frontage of both streets and create that activation with the elevated patio and that 12-foot wide furnishing zone that includes the tree grates and the trees and the seating, all for that pedestrian experience that really activates the entire corner. Does that answer your question, Commissioner
Yes,
Mooney?
thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So I think this is a question for the applicant and the city. So for that amenity space, it looks like a bike amenity. Is that just bike storage?
So this is actually more than bike storage. This is a bike amenity, like a repair space and a gathering space for people to actually be able to work on their bikes as well.
Okay, gotcha. And then, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore, please.
And then same question I think we had last week in the development agreement. You know, it says
yes.
may
Yes,
include retail, but to the neighborhood association's concern, you know, that may kind of leaves the possibility that retail would go away. Is there for this one too? Is there any heartache or anything about getting rid of the may, saying shall, to kind of commit to that retail space at a minimum?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Moore, yes, we are agreeable to that 1,200 square foot retail being required as a condition of approval.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Gillespie.
So this is a question for the city. Crystal, I know that 3-4 years ago, the city council really struggled to sort of pass a bill about student housing, particularly south of Boise State, where people were building these big houses right up to the setbacks. And I can't remember how the city council finally resolved that. Is any of that discussion or legislation that they passed relevant to this discussion?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, that was not included in the project report. I'm unfamiliar with that. I could get back to you, but it wasn't included in this analysis.
Madam Chairman.
Commissioner Gillespie.
So Crystal, maybe you know this. So does the city have in code a formal definition of what is student housing? Since many of the opponents seem to use it as almost like something in the use table. I don't think it's in the use table, but I'm not 100% sure anymore.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, it is not in the use table. There is university uses and frat and sorority, and then multifamily.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So one last question. I think this is probably for the applicant. You mentioned plantings on the rooftop as a rooftop garden, but I don't see any drawings in our packet about that. Do you have any thoughts on what that would look like at this time?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Moore, What I was commenting on is the language in the Lusk Street Master Plan that calls for outdoor amenity spaces such as rooftop gardens and courtyards to be utilized for active open space. I was pointing to our second floor exterior courtyard as one of those areas that's in compliant with the plan to create that outdoor exterior open space that helps to activate the building. It isn't, we don't have a rooftop garden. That was the language from the plan.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So is there any detail about that particular courtyard? Is it just, it's not green or it doesn't have vegetation on it at all? It's probably just mostly paved.
Maybe they could comment on whether or not they want to add any plantings there. It is an active amenity space with outdoor fire pit, seating area, grilling area, and a spa. I assume it could include plantings and landscaping. Do you want to comment any more on that? Okay, it will include some landscaping there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we don't have anybody signed up in advance for this, but is there anybody that would like to testify on this item? Please come on up. And if you're online, please raise your hand virtually. We will start with the folks in the room here. It is Mr. Story. Please start with your name and address and you'll have 3 minutes.
Jay Story, 104 South Capitol Boulevard. Good evening, Madam Chair and Planning and Zoning Commissioners. First of all, I want to thank you for your service to our community, as I know it's not an easy job, but many of us appreciate the work you do. Although this application before you may seem similar to many you've seen in the past, this one is different in one key aspect, and that's the reason I'm here tonight. I have not shown up and testified on any of these other student housing projects, but this key aspect is that it lies in the middle of the Lusk district within the 2 blocks that are planned to be the heart and soul of this neighborhood. These 2 blocks are home to a diverse set of businesses like the Boise Bicycle Project, Madre Taqueria, Dawson Taylor, Jim's Appliance, Lost Grove Brewing, amongst others. The neighborhood plan calls for storefront Main Street, and the proposal is nothing like storefront Main Street. It's not diverse, unique, and quite honestly doesn't add anything to the neighborhood that already isn't there. It anticipates removing 4,232 square feet of existing space that could be amazing, unique retail. It throws in a pittance of 1,200 square foot of retail, which isn't enough to be sustainable by most any retailer. This developer, in their 917 Lusk project that they discussed tonight, has already removed 25,000 square feet of office space from a block designated as office. And they're working to remove Elmer's at over 5,000 square feet of restaurant space and replace it with 1,200 square feet of retail in a block designated as retail dining in an application you saw last week. To comply with the neighborhood plan and comprehensive plan, this developer needs to do a few things. Number 1, replace all the square footage of retail space that is lost. The DA should require a minimum of 4,200 square feet of retail space to replace what is currently on the site, storefront retail. 2, comply with the comprehensive plan and offer a diverse set of housing options. Right now, the application anticipates small and large format options. But when you run the numbers, 88 of the 108 planned rooms are within the large format option. This is strictly student housing. We need diverse housing, and to do so, we should restrict the DA as to not allow units with more than 3 bedrooms. Last week, and it turns out this week, they're doubling down with this statement. Applicants' counsel indicated the projects are not intended solely as student housing, which is disingenuous at best and dishonest at worst. Why are CA Venture Student Housing Development Group here and not their market rate housing group? Number 3, stick with the 45-foot height limit and 45.3 units per acre. With that, I respectfully ask you to deny the application. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Is there anybody else that would like to testify? No questions right now. Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to testify on this item? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move to applicant rebuttal. Ms. Nelson, you'll have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I think the comments from the Neighborhood Association and Mr. Story are similar, really focusing on this area of the plan. And that's why we spent so much time going through all of the components of the plan of how we are compliant with the Lust Street Master Plan, because the applicant team has been very sensitive to what's called for in this area. They have worked closely with staff and with the neighbors in a number of different meetings to try to develop that mixed use experience that really does complement and fulfill the plan goals for transportation, for parking, for urban form and design, for streetscape improvements, and as to the use. And as has been noted already by questions and by testimony, the Lust Street area does call for diverse and intensification of housing. It specifically, even in this area, calls for upper stories of housing. And so that's exactly what's been provided here. In order to have those upper stories of housing and provide that ground floor non-residential experience, there's not much you can fit on a very small site like this. It is an unrealistic expectation and certainly not called for in your Lust Street Master Plan to replace foot by foot of retail of the space that is taken from a lot. On this 0.34 acre lot, the team has worked very hard on their design and efficiency to be able to expand that retail based on input from the neighbors and staff up to 1,200 square feet and still provide that also coveted structured parking, also called for in the plan, with expensive and creative modern stacking equipment to be able to accomplish that, and still pulling off all of the corner improvements on the street that create that activation, that provide those sidewalks that Nate said were missing, that the students need to walk on. Yes, we do agree with Commissioner Gillespie's comments that undoubtedly there is student housing demand. As I mentioned, the 4-bedroom units are the highest in demand. And BSU still has an unmet need for their student housing in the area. And yet this project isn't coming in and providing only large format units and is providing a mix of units and overall targeting for this area that 50-50 between all of their developments and number of units and the types that are provided that will serve graduate students, employees of BSU, employees of downtown, and young folks that want this kind of vibrant neighborhood and are contributing to the commercial businesses that surround the site. That greater intensification of use is going to bring in users, consumers of the commercial businesses that exist there, in addition to bringing in a new commercial business that will complement it. We're also bringing in that density that will support the transit, which is exactly what the city is looking for in this area. So for all of these reasons, the project is very sensitive to the neighboring uses, what's called for in the comprehensive plan and the Lust Street Master Plan, and will be a great addition to the neighborhood. So with that, stand for any further questions and appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. That'll be the end of questions for us. With that, the item is now before the commission. We're closing the public portion of the hearing and the item is now before the commission.
Madam Chairman,
Commissioner Gillespie.
I move that we recommend approval of CER 22-19 and the associated development agreement with the one change to the development agreement that the word may shall be changed to shall with respect to the retail
space.
commitment of the project.
Second from Commissioner Moore. Commissioner Gillespie, would you like to start the discussion?
Sure. Just a couple of points. I just have always had and have in this case a real trouble saying differentiating housing types by who lives there, right? I just think we have to be really, really careful about doing that. We're zoning property and approving apartments and buildings I think we need to be really careful about, basing a lot of our decision on the type of person who lives there. I think the room for abuse is obvious. So I just have a fundamental issue with that problem. If the city code wanted to distinguish and make differences between units that were rented by the bedroom and units that are not, the city code could do that and try to regulate that. The city has had this issue essentially before them for 15 years. The whole time I've been on the commission, this has been an issue. The city council has chosen really not to do that. And I think there's some really powerful reasons they did that. So I'd like to get that out there. Second, when I asked Nate I can't remember your last name, Nate, so I apologize. No disrespect. The well-spoken guy from the Lusk Street Neighborhood Association. I mean, look, we want pedestrian congestion in the city at this location, right? Pedestrians, people walking is good. We'd rather have that than car congestion out on, Overland Road or wherever, or on Vista. So I didn't find that particular argument persuasive. And second, a lack of support for businesses and participation. I don't know that we should make our mixed use decisions and what kind of housing we put in, based on an argument about will the folks who live there support the businesses that I like. And I just have a real problem with that. I think that the applicant met all of the conditions of the code. I think they do pretty clearly meet most of the conditions or requirements of the master plan. So, I'm pretty strong support of this project moving forward.
Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Moore.
All right, just really quick, since I seconded. I agree with all of that. I mean, the commitment to add retail space and strike May, I think that starts to get what is kind of going away. It's not in kind square footage from what's going away, but I think it's a start. And I think I made the analogy last week, similar to the Fowler and some of those developments that are starting to get there. I've gone to some of the places that are in the bottom of the Fowler. It's drawn me over to that neighborhood. So it doesn't take a huge space to draw people in. I think that's kind of the point here. It will add sidewalks and start to mitigate some of that impact, and just having housing a diverse apartment types, regardless of how the leasing structure is set up, diverse number of rooms, makes sense near an employment center, so that you don't have to build as many parking garages on campus, so that you don't, have as many cars driving across Capitol over there. I think it all makes sense, the proximity to campus and that large employment center right there, as well as the green belt. And I'm in support of that.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Mooney.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment about Mr. Heinzman's comment about the Lusk area master plan and predominance of student housing. And I think, Nate, you said on one of those slides that it's not in accordance with code, but the comp plan is just guidance. And that's something I've learned in my short time up here. And in this case, the zoning's appropriate. And we can't really, as for all the reasons stated previously, we can't really decide who lives in these units. The zoning's appropriate, and the predominance of the project complies with the comp plan and the Lusk area master plan, in my opinion. So I'll be in support of the motion.
Okay, with that, we have a motion on the table to approve CAR 22-19 for BDE architecture at 916 West Sherwood Street, with the change of it shall include the retail space instead of may include the retail space. And we have a motion from Commissioner Gillespie with a second from Commissioner Moore. Will the clerk please call the vote?
Stead.
Aye.
Blanchard.
Aye.
Moore.
Aye.
Gillespie.
Aye.
Finfrock.
Aye.
Mooney.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll move on to item number 4. This is PUD 22-43 for Glancy Rockwell and Associates, deferred from November 7th, 2022. This is 7670 West Emerald Street, a conditional use permit for planned unit development comprised of 48 multifamily units. And we'll start with staff. Please go ahead, Ms. Martinson.
All right. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission. The item before you is a request for a conditional use permit for a planned residential development comprised of 48 units on 1.74 acres located at 7670 West Emerald Street in an LOD zone. The applicant proposes 2 3-story apartment buildings containing a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. The structures will be approximately 35 feet in height to the midline of the roof, where up to 45 feet would be allowed in the LO zone. Vehicular access points to both Emerald Street and Priest Drive are proposed, and the parking provided will exceed the minimum amount required by the development code. When the multifamily development on the adjacent parcel to the west was approved, the approval included a condition that vehicular cross access be provided to the subject parcel upon future development. A recommended condition of approval requires that cross access to be provided with this application, and the applicant has expressed opposition to that condition. The planning team has also received written opposition from neighbors, which is included in your packets and is also summarized on the slide. The primary concerns relate to the proposed access to Priest Drive, the proposed building heights and transitions from adjacent properties, and the orientation of the northern building. However, the proposed access from Priest will improve vehicular connectivity in the area, particularly if the access from Emerald Street is restricted to right in, right out in the future. The proposed buildings are only 1 story taller than the adjacent multifamily development to the west and will be separated from the nearest single-family home by more than 80 feet. The balconies facing Priest Drive are minimized and utilize larger than required setbacks. A recommended condition of approval requires that a minimum of 15% fenestration be provided on street-facing facades to reduce the blank wall effect adjacent to Priest Drive, and the applicant will also be subject to subsequent design review. Now, public agencies have expressed opposition to this request, and the planning team finds that the proposal complies with all required findings for a planned unit development. The planning team recommends approval, and I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Martinson. Before questions, we'll move to hear from the applicant. Please start with your name and address. You'll have up to 10 minutes.
Jim Glancy, excuse me here. Jim Glancy, Glancy Rockwell Architects, 1257 West River Street. We're generally in agreement with the staff report, with the one exception as pointed out, the site-specific condition for the cross-access agreement. The cross-access agreement came about from a previous application, PUD, with the adjacent property owner, PUD 160007. This project had originally had their full access off of Priest Drive, and they compromised with the neighbors and were given an access onto Emerald for their project. And the condition was that if my client's property was ever developed, they would have to vacate their access point and have access through that adjacent parcel from Emerald. We were not aware of this until after our first submittal. Our first submittal had access through the existing access point, which is on the west side of our property. Can we see the site plan, please? Okay, this is our initial proposal that we showed to the neighborhood. The access is on the west side, the upper left-hand corner of the drawing. And then we had a turnaround at the backside with no access onto Priest. Following our application, we received a letter on June 17th that said that ACHD would not allow the curb cut to remain, our existing, and directed us to close that, provide the cross-access easement, and open up the access to Priest Drive. We questioned the letter and looked through the previous PUD, and honestly started scratching our heads because the owner didn't want to have their primary access through someone else's property to the west. We consulted legal counsel but further pursued discussions with ACHD, and they said that they could not force us to have that cross-access agreement, and that we could have our curb cut onto Emerald if we moved it further to the east, as we did on our new plan. So we moved the curb cut down to the east side of the project, kept it relatively the same, and we did put the Priest Drive access on. So we had the full through access and thought we were good. The item number 2 that I'm asking to be deleted was, or condition number 2 for the cross access, seemed no longer pertinent, as we have our ingress and egress now. And the purpose of that cross access was because we were not going to have our Emerald Street access. So we asked that that be deleted. It doesn't benefit our project or the neighboring project, and it will actually eliminate several parking stalls on both spaces, which is another item of contention with the neighborhood. And with that, I will stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Glancy. Before we get to questions, I'll check to see if we have a representative from the West Boise Neighborhood Association to speak on this item. I am not seeing one in person or online. So with that, we'll go to questions from the commission for staff or the applicant. Okay, seeing none, seeing no questions. Commissioner Gillespie.
I have a question for the city. Ms. Martinson, why does the city think this cross-access agreement is a good idea?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner Gillespie. There are a couple of reasons that we believe that cross-access would be beneficial. One being that ACHD's comments do indicate that the access onto Emerald could be restricted to right in, right out in the future, meaning that any traffic from the subject site moving east would have to come up to Priest Drive and out, or come down to Emerald and go all the way up to Fairview to the north or down to Franklin on the south. The second being that it would also provide an alternative route for these units on the adjacent parcel to come to the northeast.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Mooney.
So I understand that. So with map right there, so the development to the west that the cross access agreement will support does not have Priest Drive access. Is that right?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Mooney, this adjacent parcel does have access to Priest, but it's limited to the northern units. The southern units currently only have access to Emerald.
Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Moore.
So is there an existing cross-access agreement on that adjacent parcel? Is that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Moore, yes, as part of that approval for the western property, it was conditioned to provide cross-access to this site upon its development.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
Where, is there a plan showing where that access is located? Maybe in relation to Glancy Rockwell's plan?
The initial approval for that western parcel did not dictate the exact access location. It left it open for that to be decided at the time of this development. This slide shows where potentially the most logical place for that would be.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Blanchard.
Yeah, Sabrina, you might walk through this again because I think following on what Commissioner Mooney said here, without any access to Priest Drive for the majority of that development, I'm not seeing how this is relevant at all, frankly.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Blanchard, the idea would be that that cross access would provide access for the adjacent parcel to Priest Drive through this property. And this property would also have access to an additional point on Emerald Street in the event that its access is restricted to right in, right out in the future.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Blanchard.
So what would the likelihood be, though, that this development to the west would have that same situation come up where they'd be restricted to right in, right out?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Blanchard, it is further from the intersection of Emerald and Cole, which I believe is ACHD's concern with having not right in, right out for this parcel.
Okay. If there are no further questions, we are going to go to public testimony. Ms. Barbara Gordon, I see your hand up online. I'm going to first check to see if we have individuals in the chambers that would like to testify, and then we will move to our online testimony. So do we have anybody? Please just come on up. If there's anybody else, please just come right up when he's finished so we can keep it moving. Excuse me, please start with your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes.
Okay. Kyle Ensler, and address is 4401 North Eagle Road in Boise. Thank you for your service. I was here last week late, and so I know you were all here late, and I appreciate it. It's not very often, I've been to a few of these meetings, but it's normally you're getting up opposing something. And on this go round, I really wanted to get up and in support of this application. I think for those, my family's fourth generation Idahoan, and for those that know this area, an existing business has been here for years. I believe the applicant was the business owner, supported the community for many, many years, provided a lot of jobs in the community. And this isn't a project like next door that was just built to sell. This is a project that the applicant is keeping. And so as you read through the application, there's so many things that are done beyond code. They went over and above on parking. They went over and above on their design for the subdivision. The neighborhood, the multifamily that was approved next door, there's 20 of those kind of multifamily projects that all look exactly the same throughout Boise and Meridian. So I was really impressed by their thoughtfulness of just not trying to just mass produce something, but really taking care for the community that they've been a part of. The other thing I like is as a tree person, we're very involved in the canopy of trees that I know Boise is a part of. I know that the mayor is part of Boise's goals is to be carbon free, and this project proposes to be an Energy Star project, which costs a lot more to build. I think that's just responsible development, responsible building. And so I know that in early discussions, they were trying to avoid having the access into the subdivision. I think it was 80 county comments came back and requested that. So I know that they've been concerned for the neighbors. And I think the concern of the neighborhood is that if the access is open to the other multifamily, which has less parking, and a lot of their parking is in the garage, is part of their garage space. But unfortunately, as we know in some of these multifamily projects, the garage space is utilized for storage. So they're overparked as it is. And I think the concern is that traffic is going to overflow this subdivision and into Priest. So anyways, I love the project and I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. Do we have anybody else in the house here that would like to testify in this project? Okay, seeing none, then we will move on to our online testimony. I see Ms. Gordon's hand up. If there's anybody else that would like to testify online, please virtually raise your hand. Ms. Gordon, you can please go ahead and unmute and start with your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes.
7750 West Priest Drive, Boise, 83704. I support and welcome this proposed project, but ask for 3 slight modifications to improve transition into the existing neighborhood. These modifications follow guidance set forth in the city's comprehensive infill design principles for the location. First modification asks, reducing the height of the northmost section of the project along West Priest from 3-story to 2-story. The project would still be well above the original proposal of 38 units and follows Chapter 3 of the comp plan of locating taller buildings along the corridor and transition to lower heights as the development approaches adjacent established neighborhoods. This will be our 5th infill project on West Priest, and all others have been 1 or 2 stories. Second ask, orient the northmost units of the project with a street-facing entry so as to establish a strong visual relationship to the street, sidewalks, and neighborhood. All homes and developments in the neighborhood have a free street front entrance, including the Marina Townhomes project, which abuts to this proposed project. Third, slightly modify the proposed exit and entrance strategy of the project onto West Priest Drive. This was an approval condition set forth by the Commission for the Marina Townhomes project to reduce the number of vehicles exiting onto West Priest. That project accomplished this by incorporating a curbed green space amenity, which also serves as a barrier and allows only a portion of the vehicles that are at the north end of the development to enter and exit via West Priest. The remaining vehicles within the development exit out onto Emerald, where there is a turning lane. This was done due to concerns of safety on our narrow road of West Priest and congestion at the outlet onto Cole Road, as there is no turning lane there. There are also no bicycle lanes on Cole to the north of Emerald. Many cyclists and pedestrians use West Priest to connect to nearby paths, park, employment, and commercial centers. West Priest serves as an informal micro pathway as it is not a thorough street for vehicles, only for pedestrians and bicycles to the west. There are many transportation burdened families in the area, as well as the surrounding Bench and West Boise area that use West Priest Drive to connect to Milwaukee Street. And along with our recent local developments, there is a Habitat for Humanity development of 12 homes at the west end benefiting from this micropath. In hopes of another successful infill project, I ask that you apply the infill design principles stated in the comprehensive plan relating to infill guidance for our neighborhood locations to ensure compatibility with existing character of surrounding homes and to maintain safety of our pathway for those wishing to use alternative transportation. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Gordon. Okay, do we have anybody else online or in person that would like to testify in this item? Okay, with that, then we will move to rebuttal from the applicant. You'll have up to 5 minutes, Mr. Clancy.
In rebuttal, as far as the through access, I don't know that we can cut that off. That's basically the full access to Priest. The project adjacent to us had the open space, was entirely different design, breaking this and parking half and half. So some people would have to access or parking off Priest would be impractical for the design as is perceived. So I just want to point that out. I want to reiterate the cross-access agreement. It was a condition of approval. There is no access agreement in place. It was a condition of approval from the PUD in 2016. So that would have to be negotiated between my client and the adjacent property owners. And the adjacent property was approved with the units with total access onto Emerald by HHD, and they do not need the access through to Priest for the number of units that are there. So again, I ask the commission to approve our project as submitted and delete item number 2 for the access agreement, as it is no longer relevant due to us having 2 curb cuts.
Thank you, Mr. Clancy. Okay, with that, we will close the public portion of the hearing and the item is now before the commission.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Finfrock.
I move to approve PUD 22-43 along with the recommended and standard conditions of approval.
Second.
Great, we have a second from Commissioner Gillespie. Would you like to start the conversation, Commissioner Finfrock?
Madam Chair. I think the project complies with all the setbacks and parking criteria of the zone. The height is in compliance with the code. I know the project will go through further design review to ensure that the project meets certain criteria, and ACHD has already reviewed and approved the project. So, and they've implemented their own conditions that will also be implemented in the conditions of approval for this project. So I think the cross access, as discussed from staff, it creates that connectivity. And I know that's a goal of the city and a comprehensive plan. So for that reason, I move that we approve this project with that condition number 2, as the staff explained that they feel it's necessary.
Madam Chairman.
Commissioner Gillespie.
So I agree with Commissioner Finfrock's point. I am amenable, though, and I think we should talk about the one on the cross-access agreement. I'm always for cross-access agreements unless it damages either site, and in this case, I don't think it really does. So I agree with the Commissioner Finfrock on that. With respect to the northernmost unit, the one on the northernmost unit, I'd like to discuss both the building height and the building orientation. My view is a 3-story building on a street is compatible with other single-family dwellings in the area that are 2 stories. I just don't think a 3-story building is per se incompatible with 2-story buildings on a street. So I don't have real concerns about any of the building height. I do want to talk about the building orientation on that northern building and whether it should be turned 180 degrees to face the street, because I think that does really make a difference in the streetscape on I guess it's Peace or Priest. And so I would be in favor, if enough of us want to do it, of flipping that northern building so that it faces north onto the streetscape, kind of does a better job in that.
Madam Chair.
Oh, by the way, one last point. Sorry, Janelle.
Okay.
I'm definitely not in favor of chopping the parking lot in 2 so that like half of it goes north and half of the traffic goes south. I just think that's a kind of a bad idea in general to kind of cut the access like that. I think the more in and out spots and the more we can disperse traffic, the better. So that's my point of view.
Thank you. Commissioner Finfrock.
So I'm just wondering if this is maybe more appropriate at the design review level, if they want to flip it or however they want to manage it on that level instead of maybe here under this committee.
Maybe that's a question for staff. Ms. Rain, would it be appropriate for us to discuss that here or more appropriate for us to pin that as a discussion for design review?
Madam Chair, either or, you could continue here or just put the direction.
We do like to pass the buck, so.
We always say design review will fix it.
I don't think it's that onerous in terms of design requirements, and if it is, if it is, the applicant can come back to us and make an argument why it's onerous. So I'm amenable to whatever you guys want to do.
Madam Chair, I can revise the
Commissioner
motion and
Finfrock.
add with the added.
Well, let's hear maybe some other discussion before we make any revisions.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Mooney.
I'm kind of concerned about doing that to the applicant at this point, just because it probably costs them time and money. And I'm not necessarily, I'd rather kick it to the design review.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Blanchard.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Mrs. Gordon as well that, and in our previous discussion here tonight, it says, it's like, I hate to see an application come to us like this, where the building is clearly not oriented properly. It should be oriented to the street. And it shouldn't have come to us like this. It's clearly not simply just a matter of flipping the building around. They do this because they don't want to build an additional staircase. So I think we're all on record saying that we would prefer design review to take a hard look at this, because none of us prefer this kind of urban design. And it's just unfortunate that it got to us like this in the first place, really. But
Thank you, Commissioner Blanchard. Commissioner Moore.
Madam Chair. So I think I am okay with the building as oriented. I think fundamentally, if I'm looking at the elevations of that particular building on A201, it's our packet page. Oh, golly. 207? Yeah, packet page 207. So this is the fundamentals of the building on those sides. We've got a porch, we've got some windows, and then the access to the building doesn't appear on any of the elevations. It's kind of internal in that kind of breezeway sort of deal. So there's no front door to face regardless of what orientation we're looking at. The biggest difference in my mind are the size of those windows, the side windows. Maybe those windows, I'm assuming they're probably in bathrooms, but if they're not, maybe those windows get a little bit bigger or something like that to give it more of a street front presence. But fundamentally, I think you're getting something very, very similar. Regardless of orientation, I don't think you're going to get that front door feel just because of the way that building is set up.
Madam Chairman.
Commissioner Gillespie.
Sounds like consensus is kick it to design review. I'm fine.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think actually
Yep.
it sounds like there is support for it if the maker of the motion wanted to change their motion. And also it sounds like, we've put it clear on the record that design review, we're asking them to take a look at that specifically. So I would leave it up to the maker of the motion. Ms. Finfrock.
Madam Chair, just one more point of discussion. What would it be? I mean, what does the other commissioners, what did they feel if I actually make a added condition that design review specifically review the orientation of that building so that we flag it? Is that?
I think that sounds like a great solution. Yeah. So do you want to, well, yes, if you'd like to go ahead and do that, I think that would be appropriate.
Madam Chair, can I get some clarification on what I should call that building?
The northernmost building.
Yeah, I think the northern building is fine.
Madam Chair, I
Commissioner Finfrock.
move to amend my motion to add an added condition that design review specifically review and address the northernmost building to see if the orientation is appropriate.
Second.
Great. So we have a revised,
Let's vote on the amendment, Chief.
pardon
He
me?
actually moved to amend the motion.
That's right.
We have to vote on the
I
amendment.
see. Okay. So first we'll vote on the amendment to asking design review to look at the most northern
Add that.
buildings, right? To add that to at the most northern buildings orientation. This is just for that amendment at this point. So will the clerk please call the vote?
Stead,
Aye.
Blanchard,
Aye.
Moore,
Aye.
Gillespie.
Aye.
Finfrock,
Aye.
Mooney,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
Okay, great. So now we have on the table a motion to approve PUD 22-43 for Glancy Rockwell and Associates with terms and conditions as stated in the staff report. Also asking design review to take a look specifically at the orientation of that northern building. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Okay, with that, then we had the motion was made by Commissioner Finfrock and a second by Commissioner Gillespie. With no more discussion, will the clerk please call the vote?
Stead,
Aye.
Blanchard,
Aye.
Moore,
Aye.
Gillespie,
Aye.
Finfrock,
Aye.
Mooney,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
Okay, great. With that, let's take 5 minutes and then we will come back to item number 5. Okay, great. We're back. We're starting up with item number 5, this is CAR 22-44 for Micron Technology Incorporated at 8,000 South Federal Way, an annexation of approximately 358.2 acres. Also included is CAR 22-45 at 3851 East Columbia Road, a rezone of approximately 32.1 acres from T1D to T2DDA, and CUP 22-58 for Micron Technology Inc. at 8,000 South Federal Way, a conditional use permit for a height exception for future microchip fabrication building and 2 gas separation columns. Will please go ahead and start with staff, Ms. Garlick.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission. Before you is a request for annexation, rezone, and a height exception. The existing Micron campus is generally located south of East Columbia Road and east of South Federal Way in the Southeast Boise area. The campus includes existing office, research, manufacturing, and accessory utility uses. The surrounding area is primarily comprised of industrial and commercial developments, with the exception of Painted Ridge Residential Subdivision to the northeast, which is over 1,300 feet away from the annexation boundary and even further away from the development footprint. There is a regional activity center to the northwest at Federal Way in Gowan, and the applicant is requesting to annex 7 parcels consisting of 358.2 acres with the zoning designation of T2D-DA, which is technological manufacturing with design review and a development agreement. This project extends the current campus to the east in order to bring forward chip manufacturing to what is predominantly a research and development facility. The subject parcels being considered for annexation are within the unincorporated area of Ada County, currently zoned Rural Urban Transition, RUT. The annexation area is adjacent to existing Micron campus and is contiguous to current city limits within the area of impact. The subject area is designated as planned community on the comprehensive plan land use map, which does permit the T2D zoning. The newly annexed area will provide continuity with the existing campus zoning and ensure cohesive and predictable development pattern. With the request to annex to the T2D-DA zone, a concept plan which identifies internal and peripheral areas is also included. This is consistent with how we've treated the existing campus through ordinance number 5952, which designates the outer 600 feet of the campus as peripheral and all other areas and existing structures as internal. Areas within the peripheral zones are subject to design review, while development within the internal area would be exempt. A development agreement is included with the annexation due to the specific use and location of this property. This provides assurances that the goals of the neighborhood will be supported and any modifications that occur, another public hearing would be required. The draft agreement is provided, and at its heart, the DA ties this annexation and rezone to conceptual plans, sustainability features, and specifies future coordination for roadway, pathway, and phasing. The Planning and Zoning Commission can add, delete, or modify these conditions, which will ultimately be considered by City Council. The applicant is also requesting to rezone 32.1 acres of existing campus, that is T1D, to a T2D. All of the applicable rezone approval criteria are satisfied as this area is designated industrial on the future land use map, which does support the T2D zoning. The expansion of the campus requires a conditional use permit for height exception for 2 facilities to exceed the maximum height of 150 feet in the T2D zone. The fab building will be approximately 160 feet tall with 175 foot tall utility stack height, and the gas plant will have 2 gas columns at approximately 185 feet in height. The column height is necessary to generate the gas quantity and purity needed to support the fab facility. And the location of the fab building is within the identified internal area of the site and is currently located centrally on the 1,050 acre campus. The fab building will be compatible with the surrounding area as nearby structures on campus are approximately 130 feet tall. Additionally, the gas plant and associated columns are largely unoccupied and are accessory to the fab. These columns are narrow with limited massing, and there are similar columns at 148 feet height in the existing campus.
Given the size of the project site, the location of the fab building and the gas columns internal to the Micron campus exceeding all building setback requirements, the height exceptions requested will not adversely affect property in the nearby vicinity. With that, the planning team is recommending approval. Motion needed this evening is a final decision on the height exception and recommendation to council for annexation and reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garlick. Next, we'll hear from the applicant. And we'll start with 10 minutes. Please start with your name and address too.
Hello, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Beth Elroy, and I'm at 8000 South Federal Way in Boise, Idaho. I am the Senior Director over the Boise facilities at the campus, and I'm responsible for engineering and construction operations and maintenance at the site. So I get the opportunity to participate in the construction of this very exciting project here in Boise. I plan on walking all of the commissioners through what this project really looks like and the structures that go with it. But before I do that, it's exciting that Micron is committed to spending $15 billion in this investment here in Boise, Idaho, as well as hiring 2,000 Micron team members to support this manufacturing. And we're projecting an additional 17,000 support jobs that will come with this exciting expansion. So with that, I'll jump to the next slide and walk through what this really means as far as the Boise site expansion. So first and foremost, what you often hear is the fab. And what you see in front of you, the fab is actually located about bottom middle of the layout. And what the fab is basically the fabrication process on the campus. And that will consist of 600,000 square feet of clean room space that will be built out over 4 phases in the next 10 years. So supporting the fab, there are multiple other structures around it. And so moving to the west of the fab, I'll start there. There is going to be a support building that is built attached to Building 51, which is about 92,000 square feet of support space. That building will be connected to what we call the probe building, which is south of that. That probe building, it will include about 85,000 square feet of clean room space, and that's about 350,000 square feet in total. That probe building is where we do our final step in our testing to make sure our semiconductor parts pass before we move them on to assembly and test. And that building will also include our automated material handling system that will carry wafers back and forth between TD, our technology development, Building 51, as well into our fabrication building. Attached to the probe building to the west will be our administration building. That will be about 440,000 square feet, and that building will house about 2,000 workplaces, as well as a fitness center, a wellness center, cafeteria, conference space, and such. Attached to the admin building and the probe building will be a parking garage that will be necessary in order to support the parking needs of this campus. So then moving past to the west and then kind of traveling to the east, you see the fab. South of the fab, you see a structure called production support. That's about 350,000 square feet of a building that is where our chemicals and our gases are housed that will support the fabrication process. Then moving north of the fab, you see a central utility building. That is about 450,000 square feet. And what that building is, it's comprised of the facility's mechanical equipment required to operate the fab. And then continuing to move north of that, you see the water treatment building. That's about 620,000 square feet. And that building is where we'll do additional water treatment before we discharge that water to another additional water treatment process. So continuing to move to the east now, you see the electrical yard. That will be where the transformers and the electrical systems are housed that are required to support this expansion. That equipment will be run by Idaho Power. And then moving additionally to the east is the gas plant. That's where those gas separation columns are that Delaney spoke of. And then moving to the north of there, you see a couple of additional parking lots. You see 2 buildings for construction area support. And then moving over back to the west, you see a vendor space, a vendor warehouse. And then finally, to wrap all of this up, we'll also be building out a mask manufacturing facility. And that's located north of that water treatment and vendor space. And that's comprised about 30,000 square feet of clean room space. So as you probably read in the news, when you hear a fab, that's one of these facilities, but will require many other facilities to provide the support necessary to operate that fab. So speaking of the fab, I do want to touch on some exciting sustainability benefits that Micron is committed to. Hopefully you all had the opportunity to read our sustainability report this spring. We did make the commitment that 100% of this facility will be run by renewable energy by 2025. And that's not just for the site here in Boise, Idaho, that's for all US manufacturing sites. So we're committed to hitting that target. The fab will also be LEED Gold certified. And we're also committed to a 42% reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and net zero impact by 2050. So we're absolutely designing sustainability benefits into this facility. And we're very focused on water recycling as well, committed to hitting a 75% water recycling rate. So finally, let's talk about schedule. We're targeting to be pouring concrete by March of next spring. And ideally, we'll be able to start installing tools by March of 2025 to support Micron's manufacturing roadmap that we need to hit. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Deb and she can walk through the applications.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. Deborah Nelson, 601 West Bannock Street in Boise. Here on behalf of Micron. Also with us this evening is Paul Marcolina from Micron and Jeff Prees with Excite, the design representative, and they're also available to answer questions you may have. I just want to show this rendering briefly here that it shows and illustrates a lot of what Beth just walked through of how these buildings are connected around the fab. Delaney did a great job of covering the application, so I won't go through that overview, just kind of jump into them. So our annexation application requests the annexation of 358 acres with the T2D zoning designation. This area is already adjacent to the current campus, immediately to the east. And the annexation is proper under the applicable standards because it is contiguous to the current city limits and within the city's area of impact. Services are also available to serve the project expansion based on the comments that you've received in the record. The requested T2 zoning is also proper. The zone provides continuity with the zoning and the rest of the campus and the interior, and also the comprehensive plan supports T2 zoning here. The project will fulfill comprehensive plan goals to support the expansion of existing businesses, provide sufficient land zoned for high-tech industries, and to promote stable and clean industries. We have intentionally left a significant buffer of 1,300 feet to the neighboring residential use to the east from the edge of the annexation area, even though Micron does own that intervening land. The primary access to the new fab and the new parking areas that will be supporting that the new 2,000 employees are located to the south. You can see the existing gate C will be that employee entrance, and the construction entrance will be further south adjacent to the Eisenman exit. And the location of these access points will help to distribute trips to this underutilized Eisenman exit and portion of the southern portion of Federal Way to increase trip distribution in the area. The applicant has done a traffic impact study that does recommend some mitigation improvements at a few intersections to improve turning delays at peak times. And Micron will construct all mitigation projects that are required by ACHD and ITD based on the traffic study consistent with the conditions of approval. Micron will also continue to work with ACHD and the city on future road improvements in the area. ACHD's capital improvements plan does currently show a future road to connect up from the Eisenman exit up to Columbia Road that would provide additional access and support for the larger area. The rezone application is a small area, that triangle that's highlighted in blue there. We're requesting the city to rezone 32 acres within the existing campus from T1 to T2, again, to be consistent with the surrounding zoning of the rest of the campus. This is supported by the comprehensive plan, which designates this area as industrial and compatible with the surrounding zoning. And finally, as Delaney mentioned, our final application is the conditional use permit for a height exception limited to just the two facilities, the fab and the gas separation towers on the gas plant. The fab would be up to 160 feet in height with utility stacks up to 175. The gas separation towers would be up to 185 feet. And the height of those towers is required to produce the quantity and grade of gases that's required in the chip manufacturing process. These heights are compatible with surroundings. There are some existing towers, power poles, and buildings in the area that range 100 feet to up to 130 feet. These buildings also notably are internal to the area of the campus with 5,000 feet from the fab and 3,400 feet from the gas towers to the closest residential use. The site is large enough to support the use and the requested height exception. The campus will be approximately 1,050 acres with the annexation, making the site large enough to create these significant buffer areas. With that, we'll stand for any questions and appreciate your support.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson and Ms. Alroy. With that, we will check to see if we have, let me just double check here. Yeah, it would be Sina. Do we have a representative from Sina here with us online or in person? Okay, seeing none, then we will move to questions from the commission for staff or the applicant.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Finfrock.
I just have one for the city. There was reference in our correspondence, I believe it was late correspondence in our packets, that discussed the airport influence area B and A. And I think they had maybe an opportunity to comment, but I didn't see the response. And I was just wondering if there was, what the issue was or how the outcome to that.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner Finfrock, this area is within the airport influence area. We did have comment from the airport. What would be required is a separate request for the height with the FAA, which I believe Micron is currently working on.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
Just real quick. So what is the difference between the CUP for the height extension versus a variance? Because we've seen those with like PUDs, but as you know, something like this, I'm half expecting a variance as opposed to a CUP.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Moore, it is currently how our zoning code is written. A request to exceed height in a zone district is considered under a conditional use permit. A variance would be a reduction to building setback. So the CUP is the appropriate entitlement for the height to exceed.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Mooney.
I got a question about, for staff about groundwater. I understand there's a Southeast Boise Groundwater Management Area Advisory Committee. Did they chime in on this? I guess responding to possible concerns about the aquifer and wells in the area, especially as it goes out to the west, northwest of there.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner Mooney, we did not receive any direct correspondence with that group. If the applicant has received, I would, refer to them if they have a response to that question.
Madam Chair, got another question for the staff.
Sorry.
On the TIS, there's discussions. It seems like Federal and Burgesson and Federal and Amity were the two intersections that of greatest concern for future traffic issues. But I noticed the TIS was littered with the standard TIS stuff, and the same company that did that also has a active transportation group, but there wasn't very little in the study regarding traffic and future impact on the surroundings that multimodal transit, bikes in particular, would be impacted, and how we can mitigate that as it goes ahead.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner Mooney, as you noted, the TIS does oftentimes focus in on that vehicular traffic impact. As far as consideration for multimodal, we did include in the DA that future pathways and other road connectivity be brought forward at a future date. I think they did note there's in the plans with ACHD to have some kind of connection from the Eisenman interchange up to Columbia. The location of that road, the details of that we don't have at this time, but we did want to be sure we get that back in front of us when that does come to light. Additionally, VRT does identify this area for a future transit stop. Again, we don't have that information today in front of us, but we'll continue to encourage VRT to create, transit routes that would incorporate the Micron campus.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, we'll now move to public testimony. Thanks, Ms. Garlick, and thank you to the applicant. If you're online and would like to testify on this item, please virtually raise your hand. If you are in person and would like to testify on this item, please just come right on up to the podium. Please start with your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
David Overcash. I'm at 6826 East Libois Street. Good evening, Madam Chairman and committee members. Thank you so much for your service. I appreciate it. So I'm a retired naval flight officer and naval intelligence officer. I moved here about 3 years ago. My son Everett is with me tonight. We moved from Washington, D.C. after I served a tour in the Pentagon. I've lived in a lot of dense urban environments in my life, including Seoul, Korea, and suburbs of Tokyo and San Diego and Washington, D.C. And I retired to Boise because I did not want to retire to a dense environment. I chose to purchase a home at the end of this street, at the end of Columbia Road, pretty far away from the development that's farthest away from the Micron facility. That being said, I will say from my experience, I know that when the Chinese communists attack Taiwan and all the chip manufacturing plants that are there, you could call it Silicon Valley East, being able to produce these chips here in Boise, this is a really big deal. It is essential for the world to have that diversity of chip manufacturing because the world's going to be in a lot of hurt when that happens. So as much as I don't like it, I will soldier up and I'll support it in a way. But I do have some concerns. I do have concerns about the details of the deal with the city. I've read on what benefits Micron says that they're giving the community. But I would like to make sure that we have all that information because it sounds great, but I want to make sure that they don't pass the costs on to us in taxes and cost of living. It always sounds good in the beginning and then it ends up being harder for everybody. And I didn't move here to have a fab plant put right next to my house. When I lived in Washington, D.C., Everett used to ride his bike in the street. We were on the end of a cul-de-sac and cars would come flying by and then we get notes yelling about him riding his bike on the sidewalk. So I moved out in the middle of nowhere. I thought, now I'm going to have a fab plant right down the street. So I would like to have some kind of buffer put in between these facilities and the different developments that are out there. Some sort of nature preserve. I have a wildlife cam in my backyard. I have a bobcat out there all the time. If we don't do that, we're going to lose that kind of thing. So anyway, I don't want a market next to my house. I don't want another manufacturing plant. I don't want an apartment. I don't want a train station. I don't want any of those things. And you may be thinking about all those things, and I don't want that. So I think my time's up. But again, thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Mr. Overash. Is there anybody else in the house that would like to testify on this item? Yep, just scoot on up. You can just follow him right after when he's finished. Please start with your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes.
Yes, I'm Neil Mercer. My address is 6920 East Obelisks, and that's same neighborhood as him by chance. I'd like to also speak about this kind of on the same vein as what he was just speaking about. We know this is inevitable, right? Like Micron's just going to move in there and that's how it's going to be. All I ask is that we do this the right way. I can't help but notice she talked about ACHD recommendations, but I haven't seen any recommendations from ACHD. So I'd like to understand that better before we continue on because there's no reason not to have that. I know that it's not law or statute saying that you are required to have an ACHD recommendation, but it has been common per course in the past, and I don't know why there wouldn't be something along those lines now. Going along with some of the similar vein as Mr. Overcash there, we will be paying the taxes. So Micron, I'm guessing, got a pretty big tax break, at least from my understanding, for moving in here, which is, great, but I don't see that happening with Captain Comics off Vista. I don't see that happening at Ishtar, the Mediterranean food down there, that they're not getting those tax breaks, and there's been supplying, work for the community as well as tax revenue for the community for how many years? And that's not to say that Micron won't, but that being said, there's plenty of other businesses that have not had the same, are not getting the same breaks as what Micron is getting. So that leaves the tax burden for the various plannings up to the neighborhoods and of Boise. And some of the benefits that we don't seem to be getting out off the East Columbia is we don't have the same amount of park space around us. We don't have as many like road access to 21 is negligible. We've got the one road there that when you do have a biker on it, I'll be damned if I don't hit them almost every single time. Luckily, right now, the traffic is slow, so you can make way for the bikers and it goes pretty smoothly. However, we also know that there's a 900, there's a plat for 900 more homes and even more in the Southeast Boise eventually coming out there, which is going to increase even more traffic flow there on Columbia. And that road is just not wide enough. And so my taxes will go to pay for that, but not Micron's, who is developing there. So some kind of working with ACHD and maybe get a more comprehensive plan for that. Additionally, I'd like to bring up the issue of schools. We've got Trailwind Elementary out there, which is already kind of oversized. And if we are planning for the future, like I would expect the Planning and Zoning Committee to do, or has been doing well in the past, we need to start planning for another school out there at some point with those 900 other homes coming, plus more development south of that whole area. Eventually, there are other developers that have land out there, and I know that they are planning on using that. So I just ask that we slow the process down, make sure we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. I know it's inevitable, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mercer.
Hello, my name is Jeffrey Sepola. I live at 7014 East Farewell Bend Court. I am the president of the Farewell Bend HOA, which is the eastmost community from Micron's facility. I have a few comments and general questions for you all. Like many, my family moved to the Southeast Boise east of Micron for the peace and quiet it offers, the beautiful Oregon Trail and the dark night skies. This fab plant will take away a lot of what we love about the area, cause it to be more dangerous for the homeowners, and lower our home values. My first question has to do with what was discussed earlier, the ingress and egress from the area. Currently, we only have one road, that Columbia Road. We have had pop-up fires happen each of the few years that I've lived in the area. So my request would be that the ACDH road that has been discussed, that be built before the plant is up and running, so that if there is a pop-up fire, that we won't have 2,000 plus the additional possible 17,000 other workers in the facility and all the homeowners with one road where we can't get in and out. My second question has to do with something already discussed as well, commuting. I am a regular bicycle commuter, perhaps the one that you try and hit every day. The north side of Columbia Road into Technology Road really has no shoulder, and it's not convenient or safe for commuters or recreational bicyclers and runners such as myself. And having minimal shoulder there, I think, should be discussed or planned before we continue to have more and more cars going through the area. Third question has to do with the conditional use permit for the height exemption. It was discussed already with the airport, but I'm just curious a little bit about the 185-foot structures, if that's going to change the angle at which planes have to come in, if it causes them to go a little bit steeper, and that will increase the noise for Boise residents. Fourth question, will the power lines that are currently in the annexed area be moved? And if so, where would they be moved? Would they be next to the homes in the neighboring development? And my final question has to do with the wildlife in the area. As discussed before, we have a lot of mule deer, wolves, and other animals, and I'm just curious how the structures would be influencing the movement of wildlife in the area. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Sepola. Do we have anybody else in the room that would like to testify on this item? Okay, I don't see any hands online, so I will make a last call. Is there anybody online that would like to testify for this item? Okay, seeing none, then we will move back to the applicant for a 5-minute rebuttal.
Chairman, members of the commission, I think Delaney did a great job answering a lot of the questions that came up from the commission, and I think addressed a lot of those the questions you had, especially coordination with VRT on future transit opportunities in this area that Micron's very interested in and supportive of. And appreciate the comments from the neighbors and their participation, that recognizing the importance of the jobs, even when nobody likes having new growth and activity near their homes. But I think that's what's really important to recognize about these applications is that the way that they are being designed, this is a logical extension of the existing campus into an area that's contemplated and supported for this use in your comprehensive plan, providing those additional high-tech areas that are zoned appropriately to support the expansion of businesses where you've got support of services. And so the buffers that will be created to the residential areas are significant. Not only from the annexation area, but from the development footprint, and in particular, the conditional use permit towers. And so there is sufficient mitigation in place just through those conditions alone to address a lot of their concerns of having this as a new neighbor. We will be continuing to work with ACHD and the city on the future road that was discussed about the timing for that. Currently, ACHD does have that in their capital improvements plan for construction in 2036 to 40. It is not needed to support the trips from this development as is supported by the traffic impact study. But it is of interest to Micron to have that in place. We know it's of interest to the neighbors to have that in place. The existing conditions that were spoken of them being essentially at the end of a long cul-de-sac exist now. That's where those residents were put. That doesn't have anything to do with this campus expansion, but we'd like to be part of that solution in the future to try to alleviate that concern. ACHD has accepted the TIS as final. They did provide review comments back and forth with the traffic engineer and have that refined, and they did accept it as final, and they will be providing additional comments on that. But no further changes will be required to the traffic impact study. So there will be movement of there will be additional power lines added to the site to support this, just like there's new substation infrastructure that was outlined on the plan. So yes, there will be additional energy infrastructure that's added to support, as would be expected. There are existing power lines out there now. They'll be consistent with the height and appearance of what is there now. For school impacts, there was a question or comment about that. Obviously, we're not adding residential use with these applications. The additional activity around the site at this point is employee activity. And to the extent there's additional housing that's added to address those concerns in the future, then that would be an opportunity to address the services associated with that growth. But certainly education support and general community support is paramount for Micron. And they will continue to be partners with the city and the community as those applications come forward in the future or any future discussion about those. I think that's all I've got on my list. So thank you very much for your listening, and we ask for your support, your approval of the CUP and recommendation of support on the rezone and annexation.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. So with that, we will close the public portion of the hearing, and the item is before the commission. Just a reminder to commissioners that we're looking for a recommendation on CAR 2244 and CAR 2245 with then approve or deny CUP 2258.
Madam Chairman.
Commissioner Gillespie.
Move that we recommend approval of CAR 22 22-44 and CAR 22-45 and the associated development agreement, as well as I move that we approve CUP 22-58 with all the terms and conditions in the staff report.
Second.
Great. We have a motion from Commissioner Gillespie and a second from Commissioner Moore. Commissioner Gillespie, would you like to start the discussion?
Madam Chairman, I'm so, on the height exception or the reason for the CUP, I'm in agreement with the applicant that it's both necessary for this application as well as, it's more than a half a mile away from existing residential subdivision. And it seems like I'm pretty sure the FAA and everybody's going to figure all that out. So the CUP is fairly straightforward. Really the only issue here, and this has been my very, very, very first P&Z meeting when you guys were still in high school, was to approve that subdivision way out at the end of the Columbia Road. And Jay Story was the chairman, actually, the guy who talked. And I voted no, because, and I said at the time, I said, there's no road planning, there's no school planning, there's no mixed use, there's no anything. It was just a sub at the end of a very, very, very long straw. And the developer wasn't interested in comprehensive planning. The landowners out there aren't interested in doing a Harris Ranch style plan. The city cannot compel people to enter into long-range planning. It's not great. I wish all the landowners out there would be like, but Harris Ranch was one family and it was a prolonged process. The conditions there in that area have just not come together to do that style of planning. And so while I agree with some of the comments in sort of an academic planning sense, I don't think it's a reason to hold up this application. And indeed, there's a real question as to whether the city can hold up any application, just because it doesn't do some of the things that folks want to do in the planning process. So that's where I'm at. Just a little color, because everything comes back around.
That's on it. Great. Any other comments or discussion?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
Just to touch on, I think there's a comment about a buffer between the development and the adjacent residential. And I think that is one item that the city is working with Micron on in their development agreement. There's that internal and peripheral area. So you've got that internal area, and I forget how big the buffer is. It's a pretty significant, it's several hundred feet. Internal area, it's kind of like a huge setback that anything outside of that internal area, that's design review. So I think there's an additional layer of review. There's an additional layer of protection with those kind of residential areas adjacent and some of the other adjacent properties that kind of help to mitigate and address some of those concerns.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Blanchard.
I just want to thank all of you for showing up. We were chuckling between us earlier that this is a $15 billion project and we had 3 people show up to talk about it. So thank you for taking time to come out and say your piece.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Mooney.
Yeah, ditto. And to Commissioner Gillespie's comments about the cul-de-sac development at the end of the road there, Columbia Road. I spent a lot of time over the last couple of years working with ACHD on neighborhood stuff. And we won a master street map battle last Wednesday. So for the folks here that were concerned about Columbia Road, and in this development agreement, there's obviously assurances Micron will work with ACHD in the city to get it right. It might not happen in the timing we expect, but ACHD last Wednesday added a stub road from Columbia North to Highway 21 as part of their plan. So we're getting better about cracking the nut between ACHD and the city. And to Commissioner Gillespie's comments about long-range planning, we can't force that. But in this case, I think we did make some headway there.
Yeah. Great. Okay. With that, we have before us a motion to recommend approval for CAR 22-44 recommend approval for CAR 22-45 and approve COP 22-58 for Micron Technology. Will the clerk please call the vote?
Stead,
Aye.
Blanchard,
Aye.
Moore,
Aye.
Gillespie.
Aye.
Benfrock,
Aye.
Mooney,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. With that, our meeting is adjourned.